Good morning, everyone. It's great to be at the Currumbin Wildlife Hospital with Dr. Michael Pine, the Chief Vet down here, running the team, doing an amazing bit of work, incredible work on protecting koalas in particular, as well as other endangered species and other wildlife that are injured, that may be injured on the Gold Coast. I'm also joined by Meaghan Scanlon, the Minister for the Environment, and one of our local MPs here on the Gold Coast. Queensland is an environmental wonderland, and our government is absolutely committed to keeping it that way. Our state's biodiversity is globally recognised for its uniqueness, but there's more that we can and must do to protect what is precious about Queensland's environment. That's why in the forthcoming state budget, to be handed down in a little over 2 weeks' time, we'll be investing additional funding in actions and activities to protect endangered species in particular in Queensland, and also to protect what is precious and unique about Queensland's environment. I'm pleased to say that that $40 million that we're investing will help protect koalas and other threatened species. $24.6 million will go towards implementing our South East Queensland koala strategy. Our koala strategy for South East Queensland is the most comprehensive and detailed of its type. We've never had a plan as extensive as our protection plan for koalas in the southeast of Queensland, where of course our state's largest koala population is. The result of that will be an increase in the protected areas and an increase in the level of protection for koalas. It'll also protect and restore key koala habitats while working to increase koala populations. And Dr. Pine was just telling me about the very significant work that's happening here at this hospital with vaccination against chlamydia. We know how damaging chlamydia can be to koala populations, and this wildlife hospital is doing nation-leading work in establishing a viable vaccine for chlamydia in koalas. If we can crack that problem, if we can solve that problem, that could have a very significant benefit in restoring, protecting and increasing the koala population in Queensland. It is early days, but it's just another example of the amazing work that's happening at this wildlife hospital, and I want to commend Dr. Pine and his team, all the staff here working so hard on a Sunday to protect koalas and to protect what's special and precious about that very unique species. We'll also be investing, I'm pleased to say, $2 million in the South East Queensland Wildlife Hospital network. That includes funding for the Currumbin Wildlife Hospital, funding for the Australia Zoo Wildlife Hospital, and funding for the RSPCA Queensland Wildlife Hospital. Together, all of these measures take our protection measures for koalas to a total of $68 million since our election in 2015. We'll also be allocating in this year's budget $14.7 million for our Threatened Species program. That program will focus on recovery programs, policy initiatives and threatened species assessment. Queensland is very special because it is home to thousands of native animal species and other wildlife species. Queensland is home to 85% of Australia's mammal population, 72% of our native bird species and 50% of native reptiles and frogs. That places a special responsibility on our government and on our state to protect those species. So as I say, we are a very special state. Our environment is very special. We are a natural wonderland in this state, and this budget in a little over 2 weeks' time will continue our government's strong investment in our environment and in protecting what makes Queensland special. I might ask Meaghan to say a few words, and then all three of us, including Dr. Pine, are happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Treasurer, and what a great way to spend World Environment Day. Can I acknowledge Currumbin Wildlife Hospital, all of the staff and volunteers who do exceptional work here. We've been able to provide them with some additional funding more recently to expand their hours, and part of today's announcement is also providing some additional ongoing funding to allow our wildlife hospitals to continue to do this really important work. As the Treasurer just mentioned, Queensland is one of the most biodiverse places on the planet, so it's incredibly important that we protect those threatened species in particular. This funding will help us do so much work for our much-loved koala population, but it also allows us to do some really important work for threatened species as well. We have some really good conservation success stories here in Queensland, whether that be the bilby, the turtle, the green turtle, through to the northern hairy-nosed wombat. We want to make sure that we can amp up some of that work, do important work in places like Wild Duck Island, which we recently acquired. We know there's a huge flatback turtle population there that we want to do more restoration work on. There's so much that we need to do to make sure that we protect these much-loved native species, and this nearly $40 million allows us to do that, as well as our really strong koala protections, our vegetation management laws, the work we're doing to grow our protected area estate, and programs like the Land Restoration Fund. So it's wonderful to have this announcement today in the lead up to the budget, and I just want to say a big thank you to all of the incredible carers out there who go above and beyond to protect the beautiful wildlife that we have in this state. It's the reason that so many people come to Queensland to visit places like Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary, to our beautiful national parks, to see our iconic threatened species, our native species. So a really, really exciting day. I might hand over to Dr. Pine now.
Questions.
Okay, I'm happy to take questions. Who'd like to ask a question?
Sure. Thank you.
Can you kind of talk to this little fella in here, or him or her, what's their situation?
Sure. So Quackle in there is one of our koalas that we've vaccinated, and we're tracking to follow through the success of the vaccine. So Quackle's here today for a bit of a recheck, and really excited to say that she's got a little 4-month-old Joey in the pouch. So things clearly are going very well there, and super excited to see the vaccine working and doing its thing.
What does this funding mean for Currumbin Wildlife Hospital and Sanctuary?
Look, of course, the funding makes such a difference to providing what we can do here. We're treating over 14,000 native wildlife cases a year that we're treating and releasing back out into the wild. So this funding makes such a difference to us to be able to provide that service and look after our native wildlife.
Like koalas obviously are an iconic Australian animal, and we love them so much. So how vital is it, to see so much research and funding go into sort of their welfare and their future? Because we know that they're battling against quite a few diseases.
Yeah, look,
yes.
Look, yep, can do, yep. Look, koalas are under a lot of threat. We all know that, and sadly, for us to be able to turn things around, funding is what we need to be able to make a difference. And this funding announced today certainly go a long way to to helping protect our koalas.
Do you think it's enough funding?
Look, there's always more funding that you need. There's always a lot that needs to be done, but certainly, this is a great step in the right direction, and it allows us to do so much more.
I'm good, thank you.
Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions on koalas or the investment the government's making first, and then we might go on to anything else? We're all good?
Yeah, one more question on koalas that you've
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
For me?
Yeah,
Great.
that's okay. Given how much of a tourist attraction koalas are, obviously it's critical to preserving them in the environment. Are we doing enough here? Is there enough funding towards preserving this incredible creature?
Well, there's more we can always do. We know how special this animal is to our state and to our nation. We are, I suppose, the stewards of these extraordinary animals that are found only in our nation and on our continent. So it's another step forward, further commitment to support the great work of scientists and medical leaders when it comes to animal welfare here on the Gold Coast and across Queensland. So protecting their natural environment, protecting where they live, protecting them when it comes to their treatment, care for them, including trying to attack the diseases which are now becoming endemic in the koala population. All of that adds up to I suppose, a message to all governments that there's more that we need to do, but we're proud of our legacy, we're proud of what we've been able to do as a government to help protect koalas. The strongest action any government's ever taken to protect koalas has been taken by our government, and we'll always look to do more.
You spoke about the state budget, obviously that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Jim Chalmers is looking to the federal budget at the moment, seeing if they can find some cost of living relief. Will there be cost of living relief in the state budget?
Yeah, we've just announced a $385 million commitment to provide cost of living relief to Queensland families in particular. So that's $175. That'll be going back into the pockets of Queenslanders across their next power bills through the rest of this year. So that's an important step we've taken. Of course, each year we provide about $6 billion in concessions to Queenslanders to help them with the cost of living, and that won't change in the budget this year. We'll recommit that sort of money to help reduce the cost of living for Queenslanders. We know how difficult it is for many families at the moment. I know that from my own community that I serve in the Queensland Parliament. Meaghan knows it from the work she does in her electorate. So we're very focused on this as a government, making sure we can assist families at this time. But there are many good things happening in Queensland. We've had the strongest jobs growth of any state in the country. We've created more jobs than any other state since the pandemic started. So unemployment is low, there's an opportunity for people to get jobs. So those sorts of things. Business confidence is very high in Queensland. Investment in both the public sector and the private sector is very high. What does that mean? More construction jobs, more economic activity. That means that our economy is one of the strongest in the country because we kept our people safe during the pandemic. So there are some good things happening in Queensland too, and that will help mums and dads across the state with that cost of living pressure.
Have you spoken to the federal government about the Bruce Highway upgrade yet, and when do you expect works to begin?
Well, we're going to give them a little bit of a chance to get the feet under the desk. They haven't yet been in office for a week, but look, we're so pleased that the federal Labor government will be committing funding to important infrastructure projects in Queensland, including the Bruce Highway. We know how important the Bruce Highway is, not just for people in the southeast, but wherever you live on the east coast of Queensland. The Bruce Highway is so important to communities, to businesses, to economic activity. It's one of the main thoroughfares, or one of the lifeblood of Queensland economy runs through the Bruce Highway. So we'll be working very closely. I know the Minister for Transport and Main Roads, Mark Bailey, is looking to catch up with the infrastructure team in Canberra very soon, including Catherine King, and that will then allow us to work out a plan to deliver that project in partnership, which will be great for our state.
What is the government doing to address infrastructure cost blowouts?
Well, the reality is we've made a very significant commitment as a government until 24-25, so through the period till 24-25, we'll be investing $110 billion in infrastructure across Queensland. That's a very important thing to create thousands of jobs. This year, we'll be supporting tens of thousands of jobs across the state. We know the input costs for infrastructure continue to grow. Just yesterday, we saw a report in newspapers across the country around the cost of concrete, the cost of steel, the cost of timber. All of those things are impacting on the cost of construction. But let me say this, we support paying workers a good a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. We don't, as our design model for the economy, we don't look to suppress the wages of workers, and that was an explicit design feature of what the former federal government did. The former federal government, the former LNP government, made it very clear as part of their economic policy to suppress the wages of workers in this state. Labor governments will never do that. If you're a sparky, an electrician, a carpenter, a fitter and turner, a gas fitter, a metal worker, if you're working on a state project, we will pay you a fair income day's pay for the work that you do. And the state LNP, frankly, have a hide to criticise us on infrastructure when they cut infrastructure. People like David Crisafulli was part of a government that cut infrastructure funding in Queensland. Not only did they cut it, they absolutely revelled in cutting it. We talk about pressures on the health system. What hospitals did the LNP build? 0. What hospitals did they expand? 0. What did they commit to the Bruce Highway? Next to nothing. Certainly, coming down the highway to the Gold Coast, you see the massive investment that our government's making down here, but that's across the state. $110 billion running through to 24-25. We've locked in our $50 billion infrastructure guarantee over 4 years. We've delivered that in every one of the budgets. I've done 2 budgets already. I've got a 3rd one coming, and that won't be any change from our government.
The gas security mechanism is on the table at the moment. Do you think the federal government should pull the trigger on that? And if they do, what will that do for the state budget?
Well, I'll leave that to the federal government. Obviously, the challenge for us is not so much in the gas space because other than industry, a lot of our householders aren't dependent on gas for heating or other mechanisms like that. The fact is Queensland's done the heavy lifting. We're the state that's produced gas to power industry, to power homes, to power business. The problem has been in other states who haven't been producing gas. And that's now created a problem for southern states in particular. So we'll continue to do our bit for the nation. We'll continue, obviously, to support Queensland business and industry who are reliant on gas, to support them as we have done in the past.
How significant is the boost to the state budget because of the rising cost of gas prices?
Well, we'll reveal all of that in the budget in a couple of weeks' time, but in the mid-year review we indicated that many of our revenue lines were coming back very strongly. So that whether that be royalties, whether that be state taxation, whether that be stamp duty. But the single most important reason for that is because we protected our people during the pandemic. We didn't have to close our economy down. We didn't have those crushing lockdowns that damaged the economy and businesses in New South Wales and Victoria. Because we managed the pandemic so well, our economy stayed open. Our businesses could keep trading, industry could keep operating, and that meant revenue could come to the state. But we've already made some significant investments. We've set aside $2.5 billion at mid-year to support a range of renewable energy and other activities going forward. We put that in a long-term asset. We're looking very carefully at how we'll invest that. But we're prudently managing the finances of the state to deliver the services, the jobs, and also to protect the lifestyle of Queenslanders, and that will be made clear in our budget in 2 weeks' time.
Just my final question, sorry.
Sure.
Going back to cost of living, it's fantastic obviously that you're recommitting those measures to lower the cost of living and the electricity element as well, but is there anything more that's going to be done to lower the cost of living? I mean, fruit and vegetable prices are going up, the cost of a tomato has gone up 40% in the last year. I mean, that's across the board with all vegetables. People can't afford to eat at the moment. What more can be done?
Well, we won't have long to wait. A couple of weeks' time, I'll be releasing the budget and we'll make our further announcements then.
Remaining tight-lipped, why is that?
Because I'm delivering a budget in 2 weeks and I don't want to take all the excitement away of the budget now. So we'll be handing down the budget in 2 weeks' time. But of course, you know, Labor governments have prioritised looking after families, caring for workers, giving them a good day's pay. You know, we've seen the LNP criticising how we've been paying workers in this state. That's what they've done today. They've said we're paying workers too much. That's their criticism of the Labor government, and that's the very clear distinction. If the LNP aren't sacking workers, like they did when they were last in government, putting 14,000 people on the breadline, 4,500 health workers that lost their jobs under the LNP. If they're not sacking workers, they're suppressing the wages of workers, and that does not help with cost of living at all. So Labor governments fund infrastructure, boost the pay packets of workers, and make sure that the pressure is off families through our economic settings, and we're proud of what we've been able to do. Okay, thanks everybody.